Thank you. Thanks, Matt. So this is our Employer with Heart panel discussion. So it's the second session of today, and we're really excited to talk to some brilliant panelists. I've got three incredible panelists on my virtual sofa today, and we're talking about Employer with Heart, and I think these three definitely have big hearts. So first up, we've got Kirsten Genard. Have I pronounced your name right? I know you're head of PR at Celebrity Cruises, part of the Royal Caribbean Group, and very importantly, mum to Remy, who was born at 27 weeks, 13 weeks early in 2017, and he weighed, was it £2.6?
Correct, yeah.
Hi, Kirsten.
Hi, everyone.
We've also got Raffaela Goodby. So Raffaela is Chief People Officer at Birmingham's Women's and Children's Trust. She is also HR Director of the Year 2020. So welcome, Raffaela. It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, we've got Drew Gibson. So Drew is Senior Manager, Inclusion, Belonging and Wellbeing at Santander UK, our biggest private sector employer with Heart. So hi, Drew.
Hi, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you. So quick bit of housekeeping before we get into discussions. The chat function is open. So as we go, if you want to pop questions in there, as you hear from our panelists, we can pick them up towards the end, or there'll also be an opportunity to talk to ask some questions towards the end of the session. We're also live tweeting. Katrina's just been saying this, so don't forget to follow us on Twitter and do some liking and sharing on there. So before we get into the main discussion, I wanted to just show you a couple of slides, and just for anyone who's not familiar with the Smallest Things Employer with Heart Charter, a tiny bit of background and some stats of where we are today before we get into the main discussion. So we have been campaigning as a charity, the Smallest Things, for extended parental leave since 2015. We had a Not Mat Leave campaign. I think between us, we've met 3 government ministers about this. We've marched to Parliament on World Prematurity Day a few years ago. And currently more than 356,000 people have signed our petition to extend parental leave for parents of premature babies. We launched our Employer with Heart Charter in early 2018, and it really was as a response to our campaigning and not getting anywhere despite everything. And we've had MPs, including Steve Reed, who've raised 10-minute rule bills and things at Parliament, but we weren't getting anywhere. We weren't changing the law. So we are not the ones to sit still and just wait for things to happen. We decided we'd take it into our own hands, and we launched the Employer with Heart Charter in early 2018. And there are 3 simple asks in our Employer with Heart Charter. And the first is to extend maternity leave by the number of days between the baby's birth and their due date at full pay. Secondly, we ask that partners are given at least 2 weeks extra paid leave. And thirdly, we ask that employers support a return to work with flexibility, because we know that flexible return to work is good for both sides. We've also worked with ACAS on some guidelines about returning to work after premature babies. So that's an important thing that we're asking employers to look at. But the good news came. So since our campaign started in 2015, 2020, 5 years on, the government did announce that neonatal leave and pay legislation is coming in. So that was fantastic news until we found out it was going to be in 2023. So we are calling, along with some other charities, we're calling on the government to bring in that legislation earlier. And we were part of a petitions committee during the COVID pandemic, and you heard from Salma in the last session. We worked with the petitions committee to provide evidence of why this neonatal leave and pay legislation should come in sooner rather than later, but unfortunately that hasn't happened. So we are still on for 2023 for that legislation. And the last thing to say about Employer with Heart, if you're sitting there thinking, I want to ask my employer to be an Employer with Heart, or you are an employer, an HR person who can make that change, everything you need to know is on our website. So we have got template letters for employees to send to their employers. We've got a guidance pack for employers about how you go about implementing this. So everything's on our website. And then once you've made those changes to your HR policies, we work with you to provide you with that charter mark. We work with you on any press for launching that with your organisation. And of course, we put you in the all-important Employer with Heart Hall of Fame, which is growing. And this is a slide that makes me really, really happy, because when Katrina and I came up with this scheme, we're like, is anyone going to sign up? Let's just see. And they have, and they are still signing up, which is amazing, amazing news. So we've had 42 employers with Heart confirmed, and we've got at least 3 going through at the moment, which is brilliant. The first to back the campaign was Waltham Forest Council. And they have been brilliant sort of cheerleader for us, because they've encouraged a lot of their suppliers to follow their lead. And I had a career highlight of being on Women's Hour with Councillor Lokes from Waltham Forest Council, talking about the importance of the scheme. We've got 6 NHS trusts and counting. In fact, one of those pending Employers with Heart is our 7th NHS trust, which is fantastic. We know we've got over 49,000, and we think this figure's higher because we're in the process of doing some research, but over 49,000 employees across all of our Employers with Heart. Santander at around 26,000 employees is our biggest private sector Employer with Heart. Now we know of 29 people who've benefited from this scheme to date, and there are probably a lot more. So that is just incredible, incredible news. With the average leave that is taken is 8 weeks. The longest we know of is 16 weeks, the shortest is 3 weeks. So there's a real range of number of weeks of extra time. But all of these numbers are fantastic. But the thing that really, really brings it home is when we get emails like we did, like this one here. So a mum to a 26-week baby found out that her employer had just signed up to the Employer with Heart Charter. It was an NHS trust, and she got in touch with us and said, am I going to benefit? This is fantastic news. Am I going to benefit from this scheme? And we said, well, you'll have to check with your HR department. And it turned out that she did. And she wrote to us and she said this, that knowing we've got those 3 months back that were spent in hospital is incredible. We'll treasure every moment we spend with our little girl and see her develop. I would have had to go back at 9 months, but now we get a year together. And that extra 3 months also coincided with Christmas a few years ago. So it was just the most heartwarming email to get. And the language she uses really struck a chord with me. We got the 3 months back. We got the time back, because that is stolen time. That time in a neonatal unit, as many people on this call know, isn't parental leave. It's not mat leave. It is stolen time. So so it was really nice to receive that email from that mum. So that's it from my slides. I'm going to start chatting to the panel. I'm going to stop sharing temporarily so you can see them. So we've got Kirsten, as I said earlier. We've just heard from one mum about her experience, but Kirsten's going to tell us a little bit, if you could tell us a bit about your experience of having a premature baby, and also your return to work. How did that go for you when it was time to return after maternity leave?
Sure, thanks for having me today. That's quite a meaty question. Thank you, Sarah. I would do my best to answer it as succinctly as I can. But I mean, I gave birth to Remy at 27 weeks, as you've said, completely spontaneously. So it was absolutely unexpected. I had been doing a launch event that morning in London and was anticipating going out to France the following week for work and New York at the end of the month. So I wasn't in a place where I was thinking about having my baby at all. I was also in total denial that that's what was happening. And it was only once I actually got to the hospital and the doctor confirmed it that my body just then took over. And within 40 minutes, a little 2 pounds 6 Remy had arrived. So it was very, very quick, very sudden. And I think for the first probably couple of weeks even, I was still in shock of what had actually happened. I really didn't have a chance to process it, because something cataclysmic has happened, but your focus is entirely on your baby, who their life is hanging in the balance, and you don't have time to really think about what's just happened to you, because you're focusing on the immediate there and then with them. We spent the next best part of 3 months in hospital with him. So it was pretty much, we got to almost his due date about a week before we were able to leave the hospital. But during that time, it was, as it is for everyone that we hear from, a series of ups and downs. It wasn't a smooth journey. We had some moments that were really quite scary, and one in particular that has stuck with me ever since, where I actually thought that the hospital was phoning me very early one morning when I knew he wasn't doing well, to tell me that the worst had happened. Sorry. And that, I think, you know, there was a moment where she was building up to what happened, and the fact that he'd stopped breathing in the night. They'd had to massage his heart. And I just had this, it was like I was suspended in this feeling of, oh, that's it, my baby's gone. And although it was only a split second, it was a very, very real feeling. And she then told me the better part of the news, which would have been probably better to hear first.
Yeah.
Which was that they'd re-intubated him, and he was now back in the highest level of kind of intensive care nursery. So I mean, as you can see, that's stuck with me ever since. And I think for me, it was, what really stuck with me throughout the whole experience was firstly the shock, and then, and I know Salma spoke about this as well, was the impact of mental health during that time, because you're not thinking about yourself. And as much as I had advice from the nurses telling me to take time for myself, but you can't, because your entire focus is entirely on your baby and getting them through, hopefully, what is an incredibly tough time. So yeah, it was difficult, and we got to that point though when things started getting better, and we were looking towards leaving for home. And I think you think of this as some sort of magical utopia, that you're going to walk through those hospital doors and everything's just going to be exactly as you'd ever imagined it could be, and you'll have this wonderful time at home with your child. But it really wasn't like that. And we had, you know, constant appointments still back in the hospital. You know, there were dietitian appointments, there were neonatal clinics, there were scans. It was constant. And this is going to sound a bit weird, but in some ways I actually really enjoyed going back to the hospital. It was like a safety net for me.
Yeah.
And I felt I was with the people that knew my baby best and knew how to care for him and knew his history. And some of my friends who I was on NICU with look at me like I'm mad, but yeah, it was something that I really felt I needed, and I needed that contact with them still. It took me a while to sort of extract myself and almost wean myself off the hospital experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then I mean, my maternity leave, I unfortunately didn't really enjoy it that much. It was difficult, no. And he was quite poorly, and there were things that we hadn't found out at the time, like he had a cow's milk protein allergy, and it took quite a few months to diagnose that. He also was very, as with many premature babies, his sensory perceptions were so heightened that he really struggled with any kind of noise, light, touch. I'd often spend days and hours just sitting in his room in the dark, because that was the place he would be most comfortable and felt most safe. So it was difficult. It wasn't the joyous time I thought it would be. And when I was faced with going back to work, obviously I'd kind of missed 3 months of saving. Yeah. Before I went on mat leave, and I got to the point as we were sort of coming up to his first birthday, before his first birthday, and admittedly he was only 9 months corrected at this point, so still very small from a development point of view, and I just wasn't ready to go back, but we didn't have the money for me to stay on leave, so I ended up actually taking out a loan at that point. Not the wisest decision, but it was the only decision I could see for us as a family at that time. And ended up taking a couple of months of extra leave so that I could be at home with him until he was about sort of 10.5 months corrected, and then returned to work. And I have to say, you know, my boss at the time was so supportive of everything that I had asked for. there was obviously we didn't discuss things about additional pay or anything, and I was aware of the smallest things campaigning, but at that point there wasn't the employer with heart policy in place, or the campaign in place, and they were really supporting me coming back. There was support for all the appointments we had. I could take the time to have those with Remy as much as I needed, but really what I could have done with was a bit more time at home, and also it was only at that point that I really started to think about myself and what I needed, and I actually started some counselling as well, to actually process what had happened to me. While they were supportive of those appointments and me taking the time for those, actually I probably could have done just with some more time at home to process everything.
Yeah, and it's something we hear from so many parents, is it's more time. That's the phrase. And also, as we heard earlier, it can take a while for things to hit you. I think definitely in my experience, I was still on adrenaline when I was first at home, and that goes for quite a long time. But then when it runs out, there is a bit of a, it does really hit you, and you need that more time. So someone who has given their employees more time is Santander, who came on board as an employer with heart, I think last year, November 2020. So Drew, I wonder if I could come to you and say, why was it important for Santander to sign up to the scheme?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for inviting us. It's really great to be here and to talk about it. And Kirsten, just to hear your story and experience just really brings to light how important and valuable it is that employers are here and looking after their people in these moments. So in general, as part of my job, we try to make Santander the place where people feel that they belong and that they're supported to succeed, no matter who they are, what their background is, and a big part of that is supporting people in the moments that do matter most. And we know that our families are the things that matter most of all. So it's just so important that we do get that right. I think for Santander, we really wanted to recognise that our journeys to parenthood are all unique. They're all incredibly unique in a million different ways, and they can be filled with lots of joy and love, but also there's lots of challenges and worries along the way, from from what Kirsten was talking about, your experience. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. But I mean, when I was becoming a dad, I remember you're thinking about just small things that you just worry about and keep you up at night. I mean, my son was born with a little bit of a heart murmur, and just something like that was then a few days later you were told, nope, that's all okay. But just that days of worry over something quite small, and how those moments really stick with you. And I think our journeys to parenthood are all different in a million different ways, with different things like that. And I think as an employer, we wanted to recognise that and wanted to make sure we were providing support for our people, no matter what that looks like. So that includes a lot of talking about topics that don't always get talked about so openly, or trying to just cater for what people see as the traditional or normal parenthood journey of a normal nuclear family, of whatever it may be, because that simply isn't the way that it is for most of us. And that includes talking about topics such as miscarriage, stillbirth, infertility, surrogacy and adoption, and recognizing all of those journeys and how unique they are, and talking to our people to try and understand how we can best support them in those moments. Just again, speaking personally, I mean, I took shared parental leave when my son was born. I had 8 weeks when he was first born, and another 8 weeks when he was a year old. And it was so, I don't know what I would have done without that time. And it's interesting you say, talking about more parental leave and how much more we still need to do on that generally. And I think about, there's a lot of guys who will go back to work with just 2 weeks paternity leave, and it just makes me feel so sad, to be honest, because that the amount of value I got from spending that time with my son in those early years is just so valuable. And I think I know that I have an immense amount of gratitude that I was able to do that at Santander. So it just goes to show how much it matters and how much it matters to your people, and how much more motivated and how much they want to stay, and how much they feel like they belong at your organisation as a part of that. So having the Employer with Heart charter mark is, as part of that support that we have, is something that we're really proud of, and we're proud that our people get that additional time when babies are born prematurely, so that they can spend it in the way that they would have wanted to spend it as well. It's really important to us. So, yeah. Thank you.
And we are very, very grateful that Santander is an Employer with Heart. If I could bring in Raffaela now, who now, Raffaela, you're a kind of double Employer with Heart, aren't you, really? So you brought in the Employer with Heart charter at Sandwell and West Birmingham NH Trust back in September 2018. So one of our first Employers with Heart in that important first year. And you've recently just brought it in at Birmingham Women's and Children's Trust. So I wonder if you could just tell us why it's been so important to you to bring it in at both your trusts.
Of course, and thank you for asking me along to speak today, and it's wonderful to hear bringing the stories to life. I think it's been important to me, so my role's a Chief People Officer, which is basically the HR director of an organisation, and the two trusts that I've worked for, the boards have been really supportive in implementing this Employer with Heart. And at Sandwell and West Birmingham, it's people buy from people, don't they? And what James Devine, who was from Medway Trust, who was who were the first NHS trust to take it up, he kind of texted and rang me and said, "You must do this, Raffaela. It's absolutely brilliant. Really want to work with this charity." And it kind of went from there. So when I came to this trust, we're 82% female. I'm in the women's hospital right now. We're only one of 2 women's hospitals in the UK. We deliver over 6,000 babies a year. We've got a huge neonatal unit upstairs. So supporting our colleagues who are experiencing having a tiny baby and everything that goes with that, it's the right thing to do as an employer. And what our colleagues have told us, both at Sandwell and here, is that even if they haven't had a premature baby, they know what it means to the parents who they're supporting every day, and it makes them feel a valued employee. People have said to us, "I will never leave this organisation because of what you have done for me and my family." And even if they haven't had to make use of it, it's the perception of, "I know that you'd have my back if something did happen." And when we signed up to the Smallest Things Charter, we did that as part of introducing additional paid leave if people experience baby loss. We're the first NHS trust in the UK to do that, and copied other organisations like Monzo, Santander, Channel 4. And I want to, and would be delighted to speak to anybody in other NHS trusts who want to do this. So we've already had 2 NHS trusts who were signed up as a result of what we've done. And we really want to support Smallest Things, but also support, if you think the NHS is 72% female and there's 1.6 million people who work in the NHS, it makes financial business sense to retain. If you think about a nurse, we're losing nurses all over the place, and it costs 30k to replace one. If we can say, "Look, we'll look after you at the most difficult time in your life," we know that that nurse will then stay with us. So as well as being the right thing to do for the individuals and for our employees, it makes business sense to do this in terms of being an employer of choice, and also retaining the people that you really, really want to work with you.
Yeah.
So we're privileged to be involved. Thank you.
Oh, it's so good to hear that. And that is something, again, we hear from parents is, "I just need that more, I just need some more time. And if I can just go back with a bit of flexibility, because I've still got appointments every, Wednesday," or whatever it might be, because, those needs, as we heard earlier in the survey, there's a lot of ongoing medical needs from babies who are born prematurely, and that means a lot of appointments. So parents are really, really divided. So I think coming back to work with that flexibility is so important. Now, Kirsten, if I could come back to you. So Kirsten, we've just heard about her experience of premature birth and returning to work, but after your return to work, Kirsten, you actually brought your employer on board as an employer with heart. So I wonder if you could just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Once we got through everything and was back at work and kind of sort of re-assimilated into working mode and managing being a working mum, I started turning to my attention to well, what else can I do? How can I make this better for others? Because I think once you've gone through an experience like that, it really defines you, and you want to find a way to make it easier for others. And there were two things I did. One I did, which was to support our local neonatal units, which was joining the Early Birth Association and working with them. But then secondly, I was thinking, well, more broadly, how can I make this better? How can I make this experience more welcoming for people who go through this experience and that need that support? And I knew about the smallest things. I'd seen, I'd sort of signed up on Facebook and other channels and saw your news coming regularly. And then I started to see the Employer with Heart really gathering pace and seeing businesses sign up to it and just thinking, this is incredible. We should be doing this. It's not going to make a difference for me right now. I've been through what I've been through, but if it means that we can affect change for the future, then it's something that would be a really positive thing to do. So I went through the website from sort of top to bottom, and you're right, the templates that you have are incredible. And I basically approached the HR team, and working for a company that's headquartered in the States, I really thought I was going to have a battle on my hands, to be honest with you. But I cannot tell you how supportive they have been throughout this whole process. It's been really mind-blowing, to be honest. And as soon as I took it to the HR team, they then in turn put it to all of our 6 leaders. And it was a resounding, immediate, yes, why aren't we doing this already? And thank you for bringing this to our attention. I think much like Raffaela was saying, it just, why wouldn't we do this for our employees when we want to retain good staff? We want to look after our employees, and it's the right thing to do. So they got on board. It was this time last year, actually, we launched it to the business. What I was really proud of was that actually the company chose to really go above and beyond. So not only did they sort of extend full pay and leave for every day before the baby is born, before its due date, to mothers, it was also extended to fathers, partners, and parents of adopted or surrogate babies. So no matter kind of your gender, your situation, all kind of parents in whatever guise that may mean these days of premature babies will be supported.
I mean, that's just brilliant to hear, and it's something we hear quite often. It's mums and dads who've had premature babies who've struggled, then go on to make this change for the future people, because you've not benefited, sadly, from the Employer with Heart Charter. I wish it was there when you were having Remy, but it wasn't. So it's just making that change for the future you, isn't it?
That's it. I also think actually highlighting the fact that supporting dads and partners is really, really important. And I know you've got a session with dads later, which is great to see, and it is being highlighted more and more. But I think there is a lot of focus obviously on the baby and the mum, but the experience that we've seen from my own personal experience in the neonatal unit and speaking to the dads that we got to know, it really has such an impact on dads' mental health, men's mental health. And they can sometimes be forgotten. And I know my husband really struggled with getting additional time off work, and he ended up actually he went on sick leave in the end, because he was so stressed about it and not being able to be there for our child, but also be there for me. He was at home, I was in down miles away in Brighton. So it's really important that all sort of the whole unit really is supported.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Drew and Raffaela, I wonder if I could bring you both back in here really, and just to ask you, it sounded like Kirsten's, the changes were really well received internally. There wasn't resistance. Was that your experience at Santander and at Birmingham? Was there any kind of pushback, or was this something that went through relatively easily?
Yeah, it was really incredibly well received by our people, definitely, in terms of, I think it's very clear when you're looking at initiatives like this that you're doing them for the right right reasons, because it's the right thing to do and you want to look after your people. And that's a really, really strong message to be sending as an employer, especially when it's a large organization. In terms of how easy it is in general to make these changes, when you're big organizations, I think typically you get two things. When you speak to all of your senior stakeholders, everyone is all for it and really incredibly supportive. And as big organizations, you can also deal with some of that bureaucracy and process to be able to get there. So you don't always move as quickly as you like, and you need to be able to persevere and keep at it. But yeah, you can see just from the impacts that it has, how worthwhile it is and rewarding to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you find similar, Raffaela?
No, a bit different actually. In my previous organisation, it was a bit more straightforward because the chief exec was incredibly supportive, as was the finance director. And I think because now we're further in and the charter has been in place for quite a few years, and we've got some numbers around it, I think that becomes a bit easier, because we had pushback from, for example, the finance director. How much is this going to cost? What does it mean for people who are off on long-term sick? Why would we offer this additional leave to the parent of a premature baby rather than someone who, for example, might have been diagnosed with cancer? So some of the challenge that we got back was from a can we afford this? Is it sustainable perspective? Which it really helped then to have the data on. We're talking about 2 or 3 people in a 3-year period. It's not going to break the bank. And also people might go off sick anyway. And then the longer term mental health impact on both parents and on the family is, you know, that would cost more than giving the additional couple of weeks of leave when the baby's born. So made a bit of a business case. But what really helped was getting the kind of clinical input in the women's. So we've got, and I'm happy to share the videos if anyone wants to use them for their own organisations. We've got some of our colleagues who are midwives talking about when they had a premature baby, the impact of being able to have this additional leave. Then we had our director of midwifery, Rachel Carter, talking about that your life starts basically when your baby goes home, because you've never had a baby out of hospital before. And then we also involved our Tommy's research centre. So Tommy's is a charity around pregnancy and miscarriage and loss. So we went at it from a clinical angle. And then we also engaged with our trade unions, if you've got trade unions, and made them feel like it was their idea. And they were incredibly supportive, and it was something for the board to be able to shout about as being an employer of choice. So there's some key things which I think can overcome those barriers, but getting senior support to kind of go, look, we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do and it makes business sense in the long term, was really important in both organisations.
Yeah, I think it makes us, there's a moral argument, but also the business case to make, and the good thing is we're able to make both. Do you know, Drew or Raffaela, if you've had anyone benefit from the Employer with Heart scheme within your organisation?
Yes, we've had so Faye, and she wouldn't mind me telling you, she's the lady in the video. I'll share the link in the chat box shortly. So she was our first person to benefit from the scheme, and in my old organisation just one as well. So not huge numbers in terms of implementing something that's, but to those people it means the world, doesn't it? And to their colleagues looking on actually as to how they've been supported in the organisations.
Yes, same here as well. We know that we have. I suppose the other thing to say is a lot of what is the additional support that we have here, I'd like to think we would have been doing before that. I think the difference and the power of having the charter mark is in sending the right message and raising awareness that it exists. I think what would have happened before that is it may have come under a different name. Yeah. Probably a compassionate leave policy or sickness, but somebody would have looked at that case with that information and said, this is the right thing to do. So the outcome is the same, but that isn't the same as giving the reassurance to people that brings, or the awareness that it's there. And you wonder how many other people maybe could have benefited from that support and didn't, because they weren't aware that we would have supported in that way as well. So it's it's about sending that really powerful message of support as well, I think.
Yeah, and I think making it official, getting the charter mark and getting it written into policies also means that, it has to happen. And we hear from people who are not lucky enough to work for Santander or one of the NHS trusts that have signed up. And, you know, they really are at the mercy often of their line manager making that decision. And that's just luck, whether you've got a sympathetic, compassionate line manager or not. And that's the thing that struck us, I think, when we set the charter up, was that we didn't want it to be that lottery of who your line manager is or who you work for. We think this should be absolutely, you know, across the board. It shouldn't matter. You know, which is why we're pushing for the legislation, of course. But in terms of how it has been received externally, have you kind of had positive sort of feedback from people? How's that gone?
I think it's something that we definitely talk about externally as part of our, you know, wanting to be that employer of choice for people. So in whether it's recruitment adverts on our website as well, or in general when we're talking about annual reports or the progress that we're making as an organisation towards looking after our people more. So for example, when we're looking at our pay gap reports and things like that, and I know that we talked about the charter mark in that last year as well, as part of the work that we were doing more broadly around supporting people with becoming parents and with families, and more broadly around work-life balance and flexibility and lots of those things like that. So and I think increasingly things like that become more important. Raffaela talked about, you know, the business case for it is wanting to attract and retain the most diverse and talented people, really, and it's just one of the many ways we're looking to do that, but a really, really important one that people are becoming a lot more aware of, I think, especially in the current situation where people, I think when you're working from home, it opens a lot of avenues for people for where they work. The barriers to leaving an organisation are lower. So things like people are reassessing what they value most. And obviously that flexible working and support in the moments that matter is right at the top of that list.
I would add to what Drew said. I think it has enhanced our profile, both with the colleagues who work with us. So we've got 6,200 employees. But what's interesting about the people who work with us, so we've launched the whole package, so additional paid leave for baby loss, and then signing up to the smallest things charter, and kind of celebrating what we do. And I take on your point about a lot of this was happening in terms of discretion of line managers. So a lot of people did get looked after by their line manager, but not everybody. And then that's where discrimination can also creep in, because is it known people, or, you know, if you're friends with your line manager, that you get something that someone else might not get. But interestingly, people came forward and said, I wish I'd have had this 20 years ago, and actually have come forward and talked about their losses of, and some people said, I have never talked about this. I've never talked about the impact on me and my family, but now I feel ready to talk about it. And that just makes me want to cry. I think that's so powerful, because it means that people are talking about the stigma of having mental health issues because your baby was born prematurely. So I think people say, oh, you're so lucky to have a baby that lived. You're so lucky that this happened or that happened. And actually, it's not a lucky thing, is it? You've been through an absolute trauma in your life. And so people who work for us have come forward, but it's been a really popular launch. We got 7 million hits worldwide on the launch suite that Sarah Jane launched when we launched the whole policy together. People have come forward and said, please resend us your policy. And I just send it to everybody for free. Said, if you need any help, let me know, which actually is ruining our USP, isn't it, of being an employer with heart, but I don't care. It would be great if everybody could sign up to this, because it's what women deserve. And everything that we're doing around women empowering each other and kind of putting forward our issues. There's a beautiful quote by Rupi Kaur, who's a poet, and she says, we all move forward when we recognise how resilient and striking the women around us are. And I think it's so beautiful, because Kirsten, Sarah, Catriona, Drew, you were all speaking from personal experience. And I think if people in positions of power say, no, this is what we deserve, we're going to support each other, even if we've not been through it, that's what's going to make the difference. So I think the work that you're doing is amazing. And, you know, anything we can do, I think we do need to support and empower each other.
I absolutely love that quote. I'm going to be stealing that one. That's great. What a great quote. Kirsten, I wonder if you could just maybe share how, as an employee, how easy you found it to sort of, what advice really, I guess, you'd give to somebody in your shoes who's maybe watching this and thinking, I want my employer to sign up. You know, any kind of secrets of your success?
I think the first thing, and I think we've all said it, and is use what you've already got. So all of those templates are absolutely pivotal, and knowing kind of the key facts. I think what's come out of this is that it's such a huge benefit to those that it does affect, but it really affects very few, and making that really clear to your employer, having, you know, a couple of key bullets about what it means for them, but actually what does it mean for those that are affected by it, and being really clear about what those are. I also I know you've written a very helpful template kind of letter, sort of framing the ask, but I chose to make mine quite personal, because I think that does really help. Like that, you know, it's useful to have the facts and the stats, and so you know, a business is a business, they want to understand what it's going to mean, but it's having that personal touch, I think, as well. And you know, as we've just been talking about, being willing to talk about those things, which are hard and they are difficult, but it opens up those conversations. I think that was one of the most touching things about the whole process, actually, was the conversations that it did open up within the business, the people that I ended up speaking to that I had no idea had been affected by prematurity. Yeah. One of our leaders of the whole business, who was one of the people who agreed to this, I had no idea that his son was born prematurely as well. So it was just heartwarming to see all the messages that we got. We made a real moment of launching it internally, got everyone behind it. I shared my story, others shared their stories, and it was the emails and the messages and the calls that we got following that, even from people who weren't parents, from people who you know, from a lot of men across the business as well, which I wasn't expecting as much. Maybe that was you know, my mistake, but it was really well received, and just really great to see how many people it was touching, even if it wasn't immediately impacting anyone at that point.
That is so good to hear. I'm just having a look in the chat to see if I can see any particular questions, but if I want to open up to questions really at this point. So if anybody does want to ask a question of Raffaela, Drew, or Kirsten, just unmute yourself and go for it, and I'll just have a look in the chat at the same time. It's very nice to see all the help that everyone is giving each other and the support within this chat conversation that's been going on the sides there. Do we have any specific questions? Oh, Katrina's got a hand up. Just
my hand up. I can't help myself. I'm so used to putting my hand up in these things. I just want to say thank you to all of you to have made these changes, but also not only making these changes in your organizations, but to be promoting our employer with Heart Charter. Listening to the speakers today, we know how much it means. I think it's just a comment on one thing, which is around the neonatal leave and pay legislation that hopefully will be coming in at some point in the future, to just point out that will be paid at statutory pay, parental leave pay, and up to a maximum of, we think at the moment, 8 weeks. So while our employer with Heart Charter is there to sort of bridge a gap at the moment for families, while that isn't there in place, we do hope that employers will continue to offer it to their employees, because we know that actually if your baby's in hospital for weeks, sometimes months on end, actually being able to take that leave at statutory maternity pay rate, it's not possible to be able to spend that time that you need to be able to spend with your baby. So even once the legislation has come into place, hopefully sooner rather than later, we still very much will be campaigning around the Employer with Heart Charter, and really hope you guys are going to continue supporting us after that.
Thank you, that's great. I'm looking for any more hands, so I can't see everybody at the same time, but I don't think there are any. So
we have had a couple of queries come into our email, actually, Sarah, with regards to how to ask your employers to extend or to bring in these policies. I'm just going to put the templates that Kirsten's been speaking about into the chat box as well, so that you can go directly to our website. You can download those template letters to be able to go to your employees and ask them to make these changes.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, well, I'll just share my last couple of screens, hopefully, before we close up this session. Can someone tell me if you can see?
Can, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I just want to finish really by massive thank you to Kirsten, Drew and Raffaela for joining us today for the discussion. It's been really, really good and honestly really heartwarming to hear from all three of you. Kirsten, thank you so much for sharing your very personal story. I managed to just hold my tears back because it is, you know, I'm 10 years on and it takes, hearing you speak took me straight back there. So I just know how important it is to be supported by your employer when it comes to returning to work, and what a difference that makes to your whole life. So, you know, thank you for sharing that. Thank you to Santander and Birmingham Women's and Children's and all the other NHS trusts for being employers with heart. We are really, really grateful. I think Katrina's put that link in the chat, and also you can always email us if you want to have some more details. But I'm just going to remind you what's coming up after this session. So we will have a short break. I think I might be running to time almost, so I think I should get a prize from Matt. We've got 12:30. We're talking about our Prem Aware Award for schools, which is some brilliant training that has been launched that we're working with the University of Leicester on. So do join us for that, because there's some, whatever age your premature baby or whatever, whoever you're supporting with a premature baby, there's some really important stuff in that. And then at 1:30, we've got the Dads Do NICU coffee and chat, which is, as we've said, not just for dads, anyone who wants to go along to that is very, very welcome. And then that's going to be it for us today. I'll just leave you with this subtle QR code to say lots of people, thank you so much. People that registered also donated when they registered for their ticket, and we really appreciate any donations to the charity. We are run currently completely by volunteers who have all had premature babies. So everyone you're seeing today is doing this voluntarily. So anything you can donate is much appreciated. And we'll take a short break now. I think we've got about 12 minutes or so until the next session starts. So we will see you back at 12:30. Thank you.
Thank you.